Okay. Hey, welcome to the Deliberate Discomfort Show. We're on episode 4. I'm bringing back my guy, Brent Dial. Brent, we're going to have a dialogue today as two Army football Ranger buddies, and we're going to talk about a lot of subjects. And to kind of introduce you to the audience again, you are black, you are a West Point grad, you are Army, you are black, right?
Last time I checked.
You are a West Point grad, Army football player, an Army veteran. You're a Ranger. You love your country. You're patriotic. You grew up in Maryland in a household of police officers, right?
Absolutely.
That's kind of where you're coming from. I'm coming from a place where, I'm also an Army veteran. We've known each other for 20 plus years. We're great friends. I grew up in Virginia. We're going to have a conversation, a dialogue, because you and I are Americans, right? And Americans are known for being uncomfortable. That kind of plays into our book, Deliberate Discomfort, right? And you can pick up a free copy of Deliberate Discomfort right now at deliberatenesscomfort.com. You just have to pay for shipping and you get yourself a free copy. So we are known for being uncomfortable, right? We have the means to have conversations, to have dialogue. And I believe that America is great. I really do believe that America is great because we are so diverse, and if somebody who's an American has something they want to talk about, has an issue, has something that they want to get off their chest, I want to understand, and today we're going to talk about, racism, Black Lives Matter. We're going to talk about culture. And I've been overwhelmed. I mean, seriously overwhelmed from our last conversation, which was the first time we ever done, produced a show, you and I. Plenty of people sent me questions, good and bad, I've been overwhelmed. And so I believe that the questions were really from the silent majority of people, right? And it's okay because today, you and I, we're not going to argue. We're not going to have a fight. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to listen. And it's just like my commander told me in Deliberate Discomfort in chapter 1. He said, listen, Jason, the difference between being a good Green Beret and a great Green Beret is your ability to listen.
That's right.
And after all, Deliberate Discomfort is about overcoming fear. Don't be afraid of engaging in a conversation, because when we are all talking, we're not fighting. And that's what it's all about. So Brent, let me start with this. This is the question I got a lot of, right? Don't all lives matter? What would you say to that? What are your thoughts on that?
Of course, all lives matter. But I think that's a reaction to the term Black Lives Matter, right? To single out, to grab attention to one specific group. But I think it's kind of clever, right? I think it's really attention grabbing, and I think it's meant to bring attention to where there hasn't been attention, right? Where there has been neglect, right? And I think it's a evolution of, if you look at some 1960s protests, a man has to wear, a black civil rights protester is wearing a sign that says, "I am a man," right? Of course he's a man, but why does he have to say that he is a man, right? He has to remind. It's a reminding, because somehow we've forgotten, somehow we're not acknowledging. And so it may sound obvious, right? But it's a reminder. Someone has to say it because it must not be that obvious. Someone has to say it must not be that obvious. So if a person say, "I am a man," or "Black Lives Matter," I think it should give pause to say, why must they state the obvious, right? Why must they state the obvious? And I think if you take a step back, you understand why. Yeah, well, I think if you take a pause, then I think you take a step back, I think it becomes more obvious if you take a look around, and that was the point.
So when people tell you, like, hey, they retort and they say, "Hey, all lives matter," like,
sure,
your response is, yeah, of course, all lives matter, but we need to place an emphasis on Black Lives Matter. We need to make a point of saying, like, listen, let's get some attention, recognize that I'm a man here, similar to what we talked about on our last conversation.
Yeah.
So what is I mean, what is Black Lives Matter then? What's that movement all about, and what isn't it? What would you say to that?
Well, like most things, I think there's varied opinions of it, right? So I'm not affiliated with Black Lives Matter, but I can give you my personal view of things. Look, I think it's again, I think it's and it's like most protests, they bring awareness. First and foremost, protests, things like these, they bring awareness, and they're trying to bring awareness to again, an issue that a systemic issue, an issue that is not getting better, is getting worse, and people are increasingly anxious, exhausted, tired, frustrated. Right. So I think is bringing awareness to bring attention so we can identify, have a conversation of what are the drivers of the issue, and then start to work towards solutions. Right. I mean, I think to some people's point, I think it's valid. We can't be in this hyper awareness forever, right? We have to evolve to solutions. So we're just in the early innings, but I think it's like all protests that have served America well is to bring attention and awareness. And I think what Black Lives Matter is doing is bringing an awareness and attention to the plight of Black Americans vis-a-vis particularly police. And there's broader conversations, but more specifically with police and law enforcement in America.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all that. You were coming in a little broken. Ken, can we see if we can
Oh,
fix that
sorry about that.
connection? Let's keep the
Sure.
conversation going. So we got a lot of conversation. We got a lot of questions from folks saying, okay, if that's true, essentially what we just discussed, if it's a decentralized movement, it's advocating nonviolence, it's just protesting against incidents of police brutality and racially motivated violence, then why is there so much looting going on? Why are there so many violent protests? Why is there, shops and businesses being burned to the ground? Like, what do you think about that? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you have to address that in scale and time, right? So, yes, there was more looting or rioting, and it's not clear that that was driven by the overwhelming majority of protesters were peaceful. It's not, and I think it was vocally denounced and condemned by the Black Lives Matter organizers, right? And I think what you've seen over the last couple of weeks, I'm not aware of any violence other than being provoked then by unidentified federal officers and certain police groups. But I think what I've seen, the overwhelming majority of the protesters, even in the beginning and even more so now, has been quite peaceful.
Yeah, what do you think about what's going on in Seattle? I've got a friend up there now, and he's a Marine, John Karugi, and they call him the weapon snatcher, right? And he's got a great video out there where he stole this rifle, essentially this assault rifle from a protester, and he walks up to the guy with his pistol, and at the ready, high ready, and the protester doesn't see what's going on, and Rugi steals the weapon from him. It kind of went viral. He's got millions of views, and it's kind of crazy to see that that's going on, especially up in the Northwest and places like Seattle. It's kind of crazy how in certain areas of the country it's really, really violent, but in other areas, there's not a whole lot. Like Minneapolis, for example, it got pretty crazy up there, and now the majority of the police, from what I understand, they're all like leaving their department in mass. They're like, we've had it. We've had enough. Like, we don't want to be involved with this any longer. We don't want to be looked at as nothing less than veterans and heroes and people to trying to support the country. What do you think about all that, man? I've been kind of struggling to kind of put that together in my mind.
Look, I don't know of the example in Seattle in terms of being armed. I mean, again, that's illegal. I think you're allowed to be armed. I haven't heard of any shootings or any deaths. I think I did hear about one protester that was killed by another protester. I think it was protester and protester violence, if you will. But with respect to the plight of police, yeah, I mean, I think there are positive examples. Camden is one where they, basically abolished started over. They raised the police force, fired everyone, brought in a new chief, rehired some police, but also rehired new, and kind of hit the reset button on the culture and the practices of the police department. And from what I understand, it was wildly successful, right? I mean, it was really wildly successful. They went to a more engaged police force, a lot of foot patrols in the neighborhood. The folks really got embedded to the communities. I think it's turned out from the best. So I think when people are talking about defund the police or hit the reset button on kind of police tactics and police authority, there are some green shoots out there in the country. I think about 4 or 5 cities that have done that and have actually done it quite successfully.
Now, when you hear things like defund the police,
Yeah.
I feel like I understand what the intent is, but the marketing is awful. I mean, don't you think, like, defund the police, it makes people think, especially those type of people, that instead of reading the entire article, they're just going to read the headline and, base their judgment on that. And so we've had this discussion before about, actually nailing the marketing message, like nailing what you're trying to do. Because defund the police, man, when you hear that, it's basically anti-police, right? Like, talk to me about that a little bit.
I don't know if it's anti-police. I mean, look, I think we can't get into. I think it's not good for civic discussion if we expect to base our beliefs on slogans, right? If you're in a mode where we're like, man, that headline sucks, and I'm not going to read anything of it, then I think that's not good for civic discussion in any sense, right? I think as Americans, we need to double click on anything that we hear, so that we're not manipulated, right? What's really behind that policy, the name of that policy, the acronyms, the political slogans, what's really behind. So I think we should owe it to ourselves to always want to go behind. And that's it. I think when you look at defund the police, look, it's provocative, right? It's definitely as provocative. But from what I've seen, I think people, because it's so provocative, people almost compelled to go further and say, okay, what does that really mean? Like, it's almost like a train wreck, right? It's like, getting naked, right? It's like, you're going to have no police. I'm interested to see how that's going to work. And I think what you see behind that in terms of the policy proposals are somewhat reasonable. And actually, some of them are actually supported by some police unions in terms of reallocation of funds, right? Again, if, I'm a finance guy, right? So if every year the police budget keeps going up and up and up and up and up and up, and that's law enforcement, you're like, well, the crime rate's not going up, but the police budget keeps going up. We're not getting any savings. We're not, and then we know that if it's a zero-sum game. If it's going to the police budget, then it's not going to other things. After decades of that, you start to have this mismatch in terms of other social services not being funded or resourced appropriately to the current needs of the community. And so not all when I don't think about, when I go to my neighborhoods, I don't think about crime first, right? I think about a number of different issues: housing, mental health, healthcare. I think about a number of different issues. I don't think about law enforcement first. So I think it's provocative to let us rethink about our resource allocation in terms of law enforcement vis-a-vis other issues that, if not addressed, become law enforcement issues, right? They actually become law enforcement issues. And so, I think I think the way the police unions have approached it is, yes, we probably have relied on our police officers to do too much. We've given them the resources, but they're not, in terms of money, but we have not given them the training or the other resources, the capabilities to address the other issues. And so maybe it's time for us to reallocate, money, training, and support to other issues that, if addressed, will forestall them becoming law enforcement issues. So I think it's a good discussion for county councils, city councils, and police unions.
And what are your relatives in the police force? What are they saying about all this? Like, how an insider's perspective, like what are they saying to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think had my uncle actually is a detective, and he posted that someone came up. There was an incident at the DC police headquarters where a number of private cars of police officers' windows have been broken, right? Bricks through their windows
Yeah.
and vandalized, right? And he's a black officer, right? So I think for police officers that do their job, I would even say probably the vast majority are well-meaning folks, and they are working within the policies and practice and the tasks at hand. But I think that goes to show you, people a lot of times defend, oh, the police officers are good people. Most of them are good and all these kinds of things. And I wouldn't disagree with that. I think what the Black Lives Matter and a lot of the discussion is now coming to that they are in systemic, there's structural issues that incentivize and not hold accountability, right? We're relying on the good nature and the benevolence of individual officers, and that's not probably the best practice, right? I mean, we are to do it systemically and to scalable. They need to be held accountable. They need to be in a structure where they're giving the training. The expectations are clear of what their behavior, the guidelines for their behavior and use of force, right? And then if something does happen, that they're appropriately, there's a process that they will be held accountable. So if you're a good officer and you use great judgment, you have nothing to worry about. But we can't have a system where it also enables other officers, right, the bad actors, to act against the interests of the public and not be held accountable. So I think in some sense, it should be alignment there, right? Because look, if like anything, like if you're in a group of folks and the bad actors are giving you a bad name, you don't agree with it, then you should support more accountability to make sure that doesn't happen. Damn.
Brent, you there? Hey, sorry,
Can you hear?
man. Yeah, this HughesNet Wi-Fi is playing tricks on me today, man.
No
Like
worries.
it's never been this worse for me. Oh man, that's frustrating. So I heard 90% of that. So I thought it was brilliant, man. I appreciate you kind of explaining that and your perspectives of your relatives in the police force. Let's move on to this, man. It's something I was really excited about discussing. Cultural arrogance.
Yeah.
So let's start with this. Why does seemingly disagreeing with a certain point of view lead to someone being called a racist? Let's talk about that. And you gave an example the other day when we were talking, not necessarily a racist, but a sexist in a way.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's very specific. I mean, racist is in my opinion, probably a lot of times an overused word. Racism does exist, right? But I think when we double click, I think the narrowness of it. I think so. What's happened is I think it was a comment from Deshaun Jackson, anti-Semitic comment from Deshaun Jackson,
Yeah.
that was condemned by Jamel Hill, and she used the term cultural arrogance. And I thought it was wonderful. I think it opens the toolbox for us to discuss where some of these things come from, because I think when we talk about biases and how people interact, one, there almost seems to be a belief that only white people can be racist, right? If a black person or a Hispanic or someone else, um, espouses seemingly, I don't know, bigoted views, they won't be called a racist, right? They'll be called, something else, right? Or it may be tolerated, which is unfortunate, right? Um, but if we think about it, obviously a bigot can come in any shape, size, or color, and I think it's when these terms or epithets are used, I think culture, I think it comes from a place of arrogance, right? In a lot of ways, and in terms of superiority, right? Beliefs in one's own superiority and that of their culture. And I think that's the platform that a lot of people are using. And I think that's what's more transferable, a term that can be used for everyone, right? When they're espoused either anti-Semitic, whether they're black, white, or whatever, or anti-Asian or anti-Latino. They're usually coming from a place of their own superiority. And I think cultural arrogance is a more useful term when we're discussing some of these biases that people have and having these conversations. So I think, yeah, I think it's something that, and when you're able to accurately, I think what's helpful is when you're able to accurately identify or term a phenomenon, you're going to be much closer into addressing it effectively and coming up with solutions.
I think about cultural arrogance, and I love that. And I want to give you credit for coining that phrase, but Miss Hill, I guess, gets credit for that.
Yeah, Miss Hill gets credit.
That's frustrating. So I think about that, and I think about, how we, as Americans, as when we travel overseas, right, to different countries. There's a book I read when I was younger called The Ugly American, and it's a political novel. It was written like in the 50s, right? It depicts the failure of the U.S. diplomatic corps in Southeast Asia, and John F. Kennedy quoted it several times, and he created the Peace Corps as a result of the book. And they talk about how Americans have a certain presence when we go to foreign countries. It's almost as if these foreign nationals can pick you out, like that's an American, like just by the way that you walk. Doesn't matter if you're black or white or whatever. It's like that person's an American. And a lot of times it has a negative connotation on it because of our arrogance, because we think that we're better than everybody else, right? And to a level, we all love our country. We believe America is great. And if you don't, go visit a foreign country and see, it doesn't matter where you go, and see how they live. And you come back and you appreciate the United States a lot more. So let me talk to you about, maybe along the veins of the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. But when you were deployed overseas to the Middle East and as you traveled, did you ever feel like, to some level, maybe these people were beneath you or subhuman, or, they just something like that? Did you ever feel like that?
No, because I think you have to take a broader view. I mean, again, look, General Petraeus's book, right? In terms and his strategy in Afghanistan, in a lot of ways, of increased engagement, was an attempt to overcome our cultural arrogance, right? To win the war, right? I mean, that was the key plank of his strategy. Is like, man, we have to get outside of ourselves to really engage here at a cultural level to even win this war, right? Yeah, exactly. Think about that, right? And it's relearning a lesson, during this, whatever you would call it, counterterrorism. Look, we were all mining the lessons of Vietnam, which were cultural, right? It was like we were relearning what we, had tended to forgotten, right? So it all comes down to culture. What you said, one time we were talking, Green Berets have prided themselves on being cultural experts, right? That is the key superpower. It's not that they have, they're better marksmen, which they are, and they're tougher, which they are, but they're also cultural experts. That's their key. And when it was founded by, JFK, that was a key plank, right? And so we have to keep relearning this lesson, unfortunately. But it's a cultural. If you got cultural arrogance, then maybe I'll coin this one: cultural humility, right? It takes a bit of cultural humility, because I think, look, at the end of the day, we sit here in time and space. Yes, there may be aspects of our culture, which I'm very proud of, that I maybe think better, more useful, more functionally useful, but they work in time and space. I think there's plenty to be learned from other cultures going forward. And part of our culture is an amalgamation of lessons learned from other cultures, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So we're just a node in time and space, right? And so, yeah, at this juncture, for different aspects, I think we have something to offer the world. We have something to offer different communities. Even when within our own borders, there's things that different communities have to offer other communities. But at the same time, there are disadvantages, there are defects, there are flaws in our culture, and we have to be aware of that, and we have to be cognizant of that. So I think it's cultural humility. We're always trying to get better, and I think if you go too far, you lean too far into it, into cultural arrogance, you retard your ability to learn, you retard your ability to change, you retard your ability to evolve, and ultimately you will fail. Period.
Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. So I totally agree with you there.
Yeah.
And I think about, what you were talking about with being a Green Beret and being a cultural expert. Like we have to be, we have to learn the foreign language.
Sure.
We have to do that. Are we always good at that? No, we're not, but we try our best and we're pretty good at it. Some better than others, right? I think about what my commander told me. It's like, the difference between being a good Green Beret and a great Green Beret is listening. So if
Yeah.
we're just listening to each other and keeping calm and not being indignant or offended at every little thing that somebody says, and just like we talked about during our first conversation, it's, being a master of de-escalation. Calm
Sure.
breeds calm, right? Any person angering you becomes your master, right? That's what I believe. So if you can just have these conversations, have this dialogue, I think you're going to be in a great spot. So back to racism and cultural arrogance. I saw, on social media, I'm active on social media now, and I scroll every now and again. I look at other people's feeds, and I saw this guy, a white guy, and he was saying, I am married to a black woman, but I'm racist. I have half black children, but I'm racist. I believe in Black Lives Matter, and I'm racist. And I was listening to that, and I was kind of like, okay, well, a racist to me is a guy with a big white pointy hat with a KKK on it. I mean, that's a racist. But I think maybe, after talking with you, I'm like, the guy is falsely accusing himself of being a racist. He's just skewed towards cultural arrogance. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a more useful term, right? It's not any less, offensive, right? I mean, there's gradients here. I don't want to normalize any of his behavior or his ideas, but I think when you're taking there, I think that starts to lead him down a better path of the fight where am I a racist or not? So we're in a place where, okay, you're a racist, fine, okay, you people are, kind of been normalized, so you go on. No, if you're culturally arrogant, what does that mean? Let's look at all the incarnations of your cultural arrogance. It's probably broader than the way you treat people of other cultures, right? It's maybe you're too, you are blinded to flaws in your own culture, right? By calling someone a racist, it's not going to lead them to think, maybe I'm blind. Maybe I need to re-educate myself about my own culture, or spend a little bit more time, highlighting the flaws or balancing my views in terms of not only the positives but the negatives, and now get to work on the negatives or the flaws of my own culture, right? So I think it could be a more useful term in terms of thinking and being more humble, and then also thinking, what can I learn from everyone else? Again, by calling someone a racist doesn't necessarily lead them to think, maybe there's things I could learn if I want to go down this path of, improving myself and improving my culture, where I'm very proud of. What can I learn from other people? How can I listen, and become better and more engaged? So I think it can open a pathway for a more useful conversation, a more productive conversation. And, look, I think you get to an important point. I mean, this is also emotional, right? I mean, it's an emotional thing to be told or to recognize that you have been culturally arrogant. You have been gender arrogant. When we talk about sexism, the arrogance of one gender vis-a-vis another. I mean, it could cut both ways. Um, and you have an identity. It cuts to your core, right? When you're told or you become aware that you too have flaws, right? And it's uncomfortable, to your point.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the lessons that you have in your book, again, that's the pathway to self-improvement, not only as a professional, not only as a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, but also as a citizen, right? If you're not having uncomfortable conversations as a citizen, then you're not engaged and you're probably not learning, right? And so I think that's why I love your book so much, and I think is well needed out here in terms of bringing attention to the emotional aspect of it, the emotional aspect of this conversation, the emotional aspect of Black Lives Matter, sensitive questions about our history, reevaluation of our history, of our identity, and where we go forward. So, it's exciting. I mean, it's exciting times to see people now. And look, like I like to say, life is a self-correcting course, right? We used to do land nav, and they used to call it self-correcting, right?
Yeah.
If you get it wrong, you can get it wrong for a little while, but you can't get it wrong forever, right? I mean, you're going to run into problems if you're culturally arrogant. You're then going to start to make bigger and bigger mistakes until you ultimately fail. I mean, it's just the nature of it. And so you want to stay balanced. You want to make sure that you're correctly apprising the flaws and the risks, and you're working on them, but also you're taking the best of everywhere else. I like the humility. One story I like about cultural humility is actually the history of West Point, right?
Okay.
When West Point was founded in 1802, for the first 40 years, really longer than that, for the first almost century, right? French was a very important course, right? It was reading, writing, arithmetic, and French, right? And you would think, people used to ask, like, if you couldn't speak French or you weren't fluent in French by like your second year, you got kicked out, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, the premier military academy of the United States, the world power, like, why is that? It was like, well, in 1802, Napoleon was the big dog in military affairs, right? And so we were a small country. We were a startup. We didn't know anything, right? Every book we got was in French, right? Every war that mattered, or battle or tactic, it was in French. So we were culturally humble. We didn't say, "Oh, if it's in French, we're not reading it." I mean, we only gonna read translations. No, you read the French, right? And we made sure that you learned the French, and that's how we learned. That's how we learned. That was the pathway to us acquiring knowledge, military knowledge at the academy. Now, once we had our own practices, unfortunately, in our own wars, War 1812, the Civil War, right, the Spanish American War. We started to build our own knowledge through practice, right, and then obviously through World War I and World War II, people started to read U.S. tactics and wars and battles and strategy. But our founding, in the beginning, we were very culturally humble, right? We had instructors from France, right? Probably paid them boatloads of money
Yeah.
from
Baron
all
Bunch
the
Equipment, right?
old world, right? Yeah, we wanted all the old world instructors to build our knowledge base, right? So I think I think when you take a step back, that's the providence of history. When you take a step back, you got you start to remember, relearn a lot of forgotten lessons that I think puts you back in the balance and puts things back in perspective.
That's a great point. That's super fascinating and relevant there. I want to ask you, because I got a lot of questions about the national anthem, right?
Yeah.
So why does the national anthem need to be involved? Why do people need to kneel during the national anthem? Now, Mike Ditka said recently, if you can't respect our flag, get the hell out of our country, right? There was
Sounds kind of arrogant, but okay.
Very John Wayne of him. So there was also a pitcher for the San Francisco Giants, Sam Coonrod, right? I think I'm saying his name right. He's the only player to stand a couple of days ago during the national anthem on the San Francisco Giants. And they asked him why. He said, as a Christian, I can't kneel before anything but God. right?
Okay.
And then I want to also read you. So I had some people send me, they were very passionate about this. And so they
Sure.
send me United States Code, Title 36, Chapter 10, Patriotic Customs. And it says this concerning the national anthem, Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
Section 171, conduct during playing. During rendition of the national anthem, when the flag is displayed, all present except those in uniform should stand at attention facing the flag with the right hand over the heart. Men not in uniform should remove their headdress with their right hand and hold it at the left shoulder, the hand being over the heart, yada, 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 right?
Yeah.
It goes on and on and on.
Sure.
So the question is, I guess, is, okay, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, now national anthem. Why are people continuing to kneel during the national anthem, and why does it need to be involved?
Sure. No, I think
that's
a
tough
great
question. I mean,
I don't think it's an easy question, right? I mean, listen, one, I would say, you read that regulation, but the key word is should, right? You can't mandate allegiance. You can't coerce allegiance, right? You can't make someone love you, right? There's duties, there's a relationship, there's duties on both sides, right? There's a good faith, right? There's loyalty, right? That gets you through some of the rough patches when, you're either one side or another is not, fulfilling their end of the bargain. But America is a bargain, right? America's a bargain. It's in my opinion, it's duties and responsibilities in terms of freedom, in terms of liberty, in terms of loyalty. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, but to me, it means those things, and it's an opportunity. It's a place of opportunity, and I think there's duties, right? America has to live up to its bargain. I have to live up to mine, right? It's a relationship, and if it's not a relationship, if it's not voluntary, if it's not something that we have to do, and it's hard work, then it means nothing, right? It's just a symbol. It's just the bars and stripes, right? I mean, it's just stars and stripes. It's not really meaningful. We have every day we've been bestowed during this time and place. We've been entrusted with this country and its legacy. And if we don't uphold our bargain, we're just not here. We're not along for the ride. If we don't uphold our bargain, then we have not done our best and not given as much value to the legacy that's been given to us. Now, having said that, there's a lot of people. Is that relationship healthy for every segment of society? Are those values, are those responsibilities being bestowed on every segment of society? I'm not sure, right? I'm not sure. And when you're, as a country, if we're all one family, when that's not happening, you want them to tell you about it, right? You want them to fight for the values and the legacy and the history and the promise of America. You want people to fight. As John Lewis said, you want good trouble, right? We all want the same thing. So why is the flag involved? The flag is the only symbol. It's the biggest symbol of this big American project. It's our culture. It's our nation. It's the symbol of us. And I can't think of a more. Maybe you tell me, but I can't think of a more responsible, a more respectful way to communicate that something's not quite right than to kneel for the national anthem. I agree with Nate Boyer. Sitting on the bench is not respectful. I think it's not respectful to the promise and the values of America, but also keeping quiet, right? When there is something wrong is not respectful and doesn't hold up the promise as well. So instead of kneeling, I don't know. What do you think should happen? And again, I think I posed this question to you before. Under what conditions would you think it appropriate to protest, right? People who criticize protesters, I'd love to hear from their perspective. Under what conditions do they think it's reasonable to protest? Under what conditions do they think, the flag is not our flag, our country, the representation of our country is not living up to its promise? I love to hear their views, and then maybe we can, start a pathway of having a conversation of, what's appropriate and what's not.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. All of that, and I'll be honest, when Colin Kaepernick first started sitting on the bench, I was angry. I was frustrated, like many of us were and still are. It was disrespectful. Sure. I felt like, and our friend, and my business partner Nate Boyer at Mission 60, he wrote that open letter to Colin Kaepernick, and Colin took the time to read it. And he reached out to Nate, and he found him, and he asked Nate to come visit him so he could have a discussion about the flag and the national anthem and what he should be doing. And Colin told Nate to his face, he said, listen, I don't want to disrespect the military. I don't want to disrespect, our veterans, but I also want to bring attention to this. Right. And so Nate said, well, sitting your ass on the bench isn't doing that. And Colin said, well, is there anything else I can do? And Nate's response was, you know what? When we recognize a fallen comrade, we always take a knee,
Yeah.
And so that's what Nate recommended to him. And I applaud Colin in that he listened to Nate, and they had a conversation, and they came to a compromise. And what Nate told him was, listen, one day I'm going to be honored for you to feel that you can stand for the national anthem again. And when that day comes, I want to stand right beside you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there's that iconic picture, where Eric Reed, safety for the 49ers, and Colin Kaepernick are taking a knee together, and Nate's standing right next to him with his hand over his heart,
Absolutely.
And you make a great point. The decorum states, like you said, like you should stand at the national attention during the national anthem, but it doesn't say you must, right? And I think a lot of people that haven't traveled the world, they don't realize, how great we have it in America. The First Amendment states it, we're free. We have freedom of speech. We can say what we want to say. And I've lived in Russia for 2 years and other places where you can't say what you want to say because you're going to be arrested. Right.
Yeah.
During communism, I know if there was any inclination of disrespecting, their premier like Stalin or Khrushchev or whoever, you were thrown in prison, not just for a few days, but for years and decades. We don't appreciate that in America as much. And so, as a veteran, we think, what, I don't agree sometimes with the right for people to protest, but I respect that they have that right, And
well, look, it's not just for benevolence, right? It's not just a privilege. Oh, we allow you to protest. That's not the. I'm not sure that's the point. The point is, in our system of government, it is a functional good.
Yes.
Right. It's a functional good. Their issue is, because they don't have these early signals that something is wrong, the only thing their system is brittle, right? And so it just pins up, resentment gets pent up for decades, and then there's an explosion, right? This is a canary in the mine. Hey guys, I have a problem. There's a problem over here. Nate, guys, American society, we have a problem. There's a sizable segment of the population is not being afforded the opportunities that we all believe we should. Let's talk about it, right? It's a signal, a protest. It's a safety valve, right? People want to shut up. I mean, I know it's annoying. It's almost like a fire alarm, right? I know it's annoying. It hurts my ears. You can go take the battery out. It'll stop the alarm, but your house will burn down, right? There'll be a full-fledged fire inferno in your basement and you'll be engulfed, right? So I think we need to look at it as a functional good. Let's stop and think about it. Let's look, there's protests that make me uncomfortable. Why are these people in the streets? What are they talking about? I mean, look, let's flip it around. The Tea Party, right? The Tea Party. But when you see thousands of people in the streets that took off from work, that put their time, Americans aren't protesters by nature, right? We're too busy, right? I got other things to do. We're a very busy, very distracted community. So when people take the time out to protest, I'm willing to listen. I may not agree, but I'm willing to listen that, hey, there's something that's not right in a segment of our population and that we need to address, or else it gets worse.
Now, we've been trained on some level to do that, you and I, like we can't go into combat and then, for example, somebody says the first thing out of their mouth that infuriates us to the point where we can't think straight and we don't make good decisions, and we lose our cool and we lose our temper. Like, okay, yeah, a natural human response, impulse, reaction is maybe you're going to get angry, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then keep your composure. Like, have a calm head about it and say, okay, well, tell me more. I'm here. I'm listening. Like, and if you are angry, hey, curb your anger a little bit and just listen. Listen to what they have to say. I think there's so many armchair quarterbacks, people, behind their computer screens, right, saying things because they're not face to face with someone.
Sure.
They're not having a conversation with them to their face. And what I believe is it's not racist to honor the national anthem or the flag, but it's also not unpatriotic to kneel before it. If that's how you feel, that's how you believe.
Yeah.
We talked about the other day, prior to in Germany, prior to World War II, right? There was I forget the name of the guy who said this statement, but it essentially was what I learned from this entire experience in Germany was that 1/3 of the people will kill another third of the people, while the remaining third of the people just sit there and watch and do nothing.
Right.
And that's a powerful statement because you sort of see that in our society, in our culture, in a way where, you got a third of the people that are very angry and aggressive, and a third that are very anti that, and a third that just don't do anything. They sit back and hope that this kind of blows over. You know what I mean? What do you think about that? And we talked about what's your line. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we have to be engaged, right? We have to be engaged, and I think there's two things. It's one, instead of blind loyalty is meaningless, right? What does America mean to you? Do you think that those values should be shared by all Americans? And when that's not the case, what are you willing to do to correct it, right? What are you willing to do to make it better? I think those are the key questions, right? And so if you take that view, you could disagree on what America is supposed to mean to you and others. But I think you have to be intellectually honest that if there's something wrong, that you're willing to engage to fix it. And part of that is not jamming down your views on everyone else, but part of it is engaging in that question, having those, again, back to the basic growth where I think, people skip over, having the stomach to have those uncomfortable conversations, right? To listen to other, you can only be in one part of the country at a time, and your field of view is probably 20 feet, right? This is a big country with a lot of people who are living a lot of different lives in parallel, right? And so the only way you're going to have access to what's really going on in this country is to listen to other people who are in different parts and different narratives. There's no other way. TV is not going to give you everything, right? And you should, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not doing it right? It's like working in the gym, right? If your muscles aren't tired and you're not stretched, if you leave the gym and then you can go run, a marathon, you probably didn't work that hard in the gym, right? If you can leave the gym and you can do all this other activity, you got enough energy to argue and fight with somebody, you probably didn't work that hard in the gym, right? So it's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. And then your reaction to it is to talk louder and yell more or tweet more or yell. Like, you should, again, I think what your book highlights is in your back of your mind, you should say something's wrong here, right? I'm not listening. I'm not accepting the uncomfortableness of this process. Again, you still have the right to disagree.
That's right.
You still disagree, but you still have to go through the process and listen. I think that's important. And I think that's where we're missing. And again, I think if it fulfills all disciplines of life, professional, familial, in your family, in your relationships, and again, as a citizen as well. I think if you take those same approaches, I think we will all be more successful.
Preach on, my brother. Like if you're living your life and you think, man, life is easy, you're not living it right. right.
You're not living it right? Yeah, you're missing something.
You're not. Hey, you're doing something wrong. You need to reassess your situation because you got to choose hard things, or hard things are going to choose you eventually.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's what we're seeing right now in our country, in our society right now, is instead of addressing certain issues, we've sort of ignored it or swept it under the rug or just said, yeah, eventually we'll get to it. And then, like you said, it built up. And now we have this explosion that we have to deal with. So let's deal with it.
Yeah.
Let's listen. Let's talk. Let's have a
deal with
conversation.
it.
Let's take action.
Yeah.
Let's take action right now. I told you, I said, listen, maybe we can talk for 30 minutes. It's already been 51 minutes.
That's how it normally is with us.
And I apologize in the beginning. I don't know if you noticed or not, man, but my internet connection was so bad. Like I could barely hear you until halfway through. And I was like, what? I was like, couldn't even listen to you, man. I was so frustrated, but we're all fixed now. At least for the last 30 minutes, I think we've been pretty good. So I want to take some questions from the audience because I know I've been seeing a bunch. So Ken, text me a few of them and we'll discuss it right now. For maybe 10 minutes. You got 10 minutes? We'll talk.
Yeah, I got 10 minutes.
And we'll go.
Anything for you, Jason B.A. Van Camp.
Yeah, no, BA. People are like, BA, huh? I'm like, it doesn't stand for badass. It stands for below average, Van Camp. So what do we got, Ken? Let's see. Mike Guzman said some great things. Oh, Goose, man.
Goose.
Talk to him. Okay. What do you think about the leadership of Black Lives Matter? Do you know anything about the leaders who's leading the cause? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know much about the leadership about Black Lives Matter. But I think, look, it's the fact that you know what it is, the fact that it's actually making change, the fact that folks have rallied around. Obviously, it resonates with a lot of people. That's kind of what I see. I think their challenge now will be for sure to move to, more prescriptive, more proposal oriented, right? And to hold themselves accountable for actual change. Now that we've it's a two-part problem, right? One is awareness, and the second one is change, right? And so I think they've done a bang-up job on awareness. I think the challenge before all of us, and it's not just them, right? I mean, they got us here, right? So I think it's all on us to, start to progress to, tangible changes, tangible policy changes in American cities as we move forward.
That's a great answer to that question. The victim mentality, why is it so prevalent among the Black community?
Okay. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with the premise of that question, that there is a victim. Before you can ask why, you have to stipulate that there is, right? So I'm not sure that there is. But again, I think if you I think if you have to listen, and I think, what I hear and what I see and what I've experienced is not a victim mentality, but it is a continual, and it's exhausting. If it's exhausting for you, it's exhausting for Blacks, right? We have been fighting this fight for hundreds of years, right? Hundreds of years. So I'm sure if you're exhausted, we're exhausted, right? And so what I think is that, think about what do you think would be, what kind of proposals, how do we move to the next phase? Look, the thing about life is not going to change. It does. If you don't move it, it's the first law of thermodynamics, right? A body in motion will stay in motion to the outside action, right? And so, if we're not going to do anything, nothing's going to happen. We're going to have to make the changes. Our children and grandchildren in 2020, 2100 or 2200, the year 2200, are we dealing with the same thing? I mean, if you think in 1700, they were like, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It'll solve itself." And here we are in 2020 still dealing with similar issues, right? I mean, we had an ultimate, an incredible lost opportunity. And to think, history's not linear, right? We missed opportunity with Reconstruction, right? With the post-Civil War era in the early years. I mean, arguably America was more egalitarian at that period than any period of its history. And we've actually gone backwards, right? And so if we can get back to par and then push forward into the future, I think, look, I think that's to your point, in your book, Jason, you said it was a point in there where you were like, you know, why do Green Berets always complaining? They're always
Yeah.
complaining. They complain because they care, right? They care. Again, it's back to the metaphor of the fire alarm. You can always take the battery out of the fire alarm, but then what's the point? It's there for a reason, and because it's uncomfortable, it's because it's telling you something, right? It's telling you something's wrong, right? And so a victim mentality, complaining, come on. I think it's because people care. People want to hold America accountable into its best ideals. We're not there yet. And until we get there, why should we stop complaining? Why should we stop, pushing forward? We can always pat ourselves on the back of where we are. Sure, there's time for that. There's opportunity for that. We have come a long way, but we shouldn't stop here. We're not there yet. We're not where we should be.
I love that answer. And I love how you tied it back into deliberate discomfort. Nobody complains more than the guys on an SF team, man. It was absolutely overwhelming. I'm a commander, right? So it's like, man, type A personality just complaining. And to be honest, and maybe you haven't read the book yet, it was basically like, it was so frustrating to me until somebody changed my mindset. They explained to me, listen, they're complaining because they care. They want something to change. They want it to get better. If they didn't care, they wouldn't say anything. They just leave.
Yeah.
When I kind of take this mentality and apply it to what's going on right now, and the protests and the national anthem and everything else, it's like, well, listen, we're all Americans.
Yep.
Right? That's a phenomenal foundation, a baseline to start with. We're all Americans. And if they really didn't care, right, they would leave. And people were like, well, you can't respect the flag, leave this country. Well, if they didn't care, they would. You know what I mean? They would even go to Canada, or they go to Europe, or wherever, but they care enough to see change happen, and they care enough about being an American to stay here. And at the very least, that's the foundation to build off of.
Yeah, let's harness that energy. Let's work together, right? There's a lot of other issues. I mean, Black lives is not the only issue in America, right? I mean, there's a lot of issues, a lot of very important issues, and some, my knee-jerk reactions are similar. Ah, man, that sounds stupid. I don't understand, man. I don't know, but again, I think to not be a hypocrite, listen, right, and put yourself have the imagination to put yourself on the other side, right? And say, they care, they're Americans. What can we do together to move forward to make them feel comfortable? Because if we have these different pockets of communities that don't feel the promise of America for different reasons, but they still aggregate to a disaffected portion of the population, we're not strong, right? We're not what we think we are. And we only have a small segment, like my community, we're good. My little community is good, but the all 99 other ones aren't. That's not America, right? So I think it's an exercise to, look at the country in total and say, look, are all the communities, and look, it's a project, right? We only have a defined time of being on this earth, but while we are custodians of this great project, what have we done? Right? And what can we do? We are custodians. If you look at all the important parts of, every generation's been tested, sometimes by war, but a lot of times by domestic politics, to be ushers and custodians of this American project and push it forward. So I think, look, in front of us as an awesome opportunity, and I think we should seize it.
I think, I love how you said that, and I think that if you realize that we're all going to die one day, we got a finite amount of time on this earth. And as Jefferson said, we may consider each generation like a distinct nation with the right by the will of its majority to bind themselves, but none to bind the succeeding generation more than the inhabitants of another country. So you see, we talked about a lot of the people talking right now about fascism and socialism and communism and using all these terms. And your response to me when I brought that up was, okay, boomer. Like, you know what I mean? Like, And for people that don't understand that mentality, it's sort of like that's an old fashioned, archaic way of thinking. You know, it's
what are we going to do now with the project that we have here? How
that
can we make
playbook.
this better? Yeah.
That playbook is not as effective as it used to be.
Yep.
You know what I mean? One more question, because I saw my man David Innes, Dr. David Innes. He and I were at Camp Buckner together. We were Ranger buddies.
Whoa.
My man
Nice.
David Innes, I love this guy. And he's awesome, man. He wrote
Cadet Dennis.
We were both great story I'll tell another time.
Cadet third class Innes.
Doing land app together. It was awesome, man. So Dr. Dave, you said this. How do you respond to the counterfacts on police killings? The percentage is so low. Fight against something bigger. And this will be the last question, and then we'll kind of wrap up our final thoughts.
Counterfacts to who, right? I mean, I'm not sure that's the response you give to your family, right? If your family was affected, a sample size of one of your loved one being needlessly killed is too big. Right? That's your whole world. So I think that's one. I mean, it matters. I think statistically abstracting it to, the tragedies of families and communities that have these, microaggressions, with that killing, there's also other aggressions that may not lead to killing, right? They lead to other injuries. And then there's also lead to perception, an unhelpful perception in those communities. I think you have to consider all those things. But again, to that family, that community, one death is too many. Number two, again, on the statistical abstraction, what's the threshold, right? I mean, we talked about this before, Jason, in terms of car recalls, right? If it's 5%, 10% killing people, I mean, there's going to be a DOJ investigation, right? And a full recall, right? Like the brakes are going out, right? Like, I mean, this whole thing of, it needs to broach 50% for it to be relevant. No, it doesn't. So look, I mean, it's big enough to be a major problem in this country. The statistics are whatever you want to be, but look, the fact that we can do something about it, that's the other thing, right? The fact that whatever the statistic is, if we can make it go down by 80-90% just by holding that institution accountable, right? That's what we should be doing, period. That's what we should be doing. If we can, what's $1 million here? Defund the police. What's $1 million? $2 million here. That's nothing. I think the LA County budget, they move some money around. That's nothing. Look, it's a start, and it matters. And I think it's, I'm in finance, so a lot of times people get in trouble is with the accounting, right? They're not counting, that's not really an expense. Well, this is extra revenue. Well, we didn't really get the money, but that's revenue too, right? You can play fuzzy math with the accounting, right? Ultimately, we can't account for statistically for all of the, trauma that happens to communities. The trauma of Minneapolis, right, with George Floyd. How do you account for that, right? How do you quantify that? How much money do you attribute to that? How much money do you attribute to the pain that's felt by thousands of protesters who felt it was important enough to walk out into the street for weeks on end? How do you account for that, right? So it's not statistically irrelevant. Hardly. And the fact that we can do something about it, we should.
Great points. I'm gonna end it here. We've talked for over an hour. It's been awesome. You've been awesome, man. Seriously.
I tried, man. Look at what we're trying to do here is just model those conversations that should be happening around America. I have 20 years. We go back a long time, right? And I think it's important that to build these pathways to have these conversations, because we're one family. We have a very strong relationship. We don't agree with everything, but we also really willing to listen and respect each other, because you are a part of me and I'm a part of you, right? I leverage looking at the world through your eyes. I've learned so much from it, and hopefully it's been reciprocated. But I think that's the only way you kind of get the full picture. Otherwise, you're looking through a soda straw and you're not getting the full picture.
Looking through a soda straw. Well said. Well, I'll read off one last thing. We'll sign off. My friend Chris Long, he played in the NFL. He's Howie Long's son, number 2 overall pick out of UVA, defensive end, won 2 Super Bowls, one with the Patriots, one with the Eagles. He's a huge veteran supporter. The guy gives back, to so many different charities. He's got his own charity. His last paycheck in the NFL, millions of dollars, he gave it all to charity. He didn't take a dime of it. His last paycheck. This guy's sort of a hero of mine. I really look up to him. We climbed Mount Kilimanjaro together a few years ago to bring for clean water as part of his project called Water Boys.
Awesome.
Bring awareness to that. It was awesome. But he had this note he sent me the other day, and I just want to read a couple paragraphs of it. He said this: "Not my problem is not my mindset. And for many supporters who look like me," he's a white guy, "I know that you've taken that same mentality into supporting our Black community now and always. But we need more in this trying time. Systemic racism and police brutality are not they problems. They are us problems. America has long been heralded as the greatest country on earth. And while I've only lived in one, I can tell you that I'm thankful to call it home. And I love my home. And this feels like a complacent declaration when not all of our neighbors right here at home feel the same way. For all the evils in the world, apathy is one of the most dangerous. And unfortunately, it's one of the most prevalent. If you're listening, you're not likely a culprit. Don't start now. Keep leading with empathy, love, and a desire to understand. Resist the satisfaction of saying to yourself, I'm not a racist. We must be anti-racist." So I want to leave it at that because I like how he wrote
that's powerful.
that. And last 2 things for the audience. Thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully you learned a lot and got a lot out of this. Share this with your network. Share this with your people because I feel like there was a lot of powerful emotions and there's a very strong message in what we discussed today. If you want to get a copy of Deliberate Discomfort, a free copy, all you have to do is pay for shipping. Go to deliberateDiscomfort.com and get yourself a free copy of the book. And then, as always, thanks to Maui Jim Sunglasses for the support. And I'll turn it over to Ken for the outro, and we'll go from there. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks, Jay.